Vivid verses.
There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a man when he realizes he has been used. Not the loud, clattering silence of betrayal. Nothing so dramatic. It is quieter than that. It arrives the way a draft does. You don't notice the cold until you're already in it. I notice on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in the corridor outside the break room at work, phone pressed to my ear, listening to a man I barely knew tell me something I could not quite believe. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Her name was Cora. She'd come into my life by way of a mutual friend's back patio gathering. The kind where someone brings a dish, someone else brings wine, and the introductions happen in the half-dark between the garden lights. She was warm, easy to talk to, and had a way of laughing at her own mistakes before anyone else could that I found immediately disarming. We moved slowly at first, which suited me. I don't rush into things by instinct or habit. I watch. I listen. I take stock. By the time we'd been seeing each other a good while, I knew her reasonably well. I knew she had a daughter, B, 6 years old, serious eyes, obsessed with a particular television program about a girl who solved mysteries. I knew the girl's father, a man named Gareth, was difficult in the way that men are difficult when they feel they've lost something and blame everyone but themselves. There was a custody arrangement that had been informal for some time and was now becoming formal. Because informal arrangements rarely survive the moment someone decides they want more leverage. I didn't involve myself. I listened when Cora needed to talk, asked sensible questions when she seemed to want guidance, and otherwise stayed in my lane. That is the appropriate distance for a man who is not the child's father. Then she asked me for the letter. We were at her kitchen table, a Wednesday evening, leftover pasta between us. She'd been quieter than usual throughout dinner. I noticed, but hadn't pressed. Pressing is rarely the right move. Given room, people say what they mean to say. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. The solicitor, my solicitor, says it would help to have a character reference. For someone who knows me, who's seen me with B. She paused. Someone the court might find credible. I turned it over. Credible was an interesting word choice. Not someone who loves me, not someone who knows me well. Credible. She was thinking like a strategist, which I respected. What would it involve? Just a letter, saying what you've observed, how I am with her. Nothing dramatic. I was quiet for a moment. I like B. I'd seen Cora with her daughter on enough occasions to have a genuine view. I also had no illusions about the fact that whatever I wrote would be placed before a family court and would therefore be formal in a way that most things in my life are not. That concentrated my thinking. I'll write something, I said. Honest. I won't overstate things. That's all I'm asking. I believed her then. I wrote the letter over 2 evenings. I am not a man who dashes off important documents. I sat with it. I considered what I had actually witnessed. Cora reading to B, the patient way she handled the girl's questions, the consistent routine she maintained, the way she spoke about Gareth to be with a neutrality that I thought was genuinely admirable given the circumstances. These were things I'd seen. I wrote them as I'd seen them. I was careful about language. I did not describe myself as anything other than what I was, a man who had spent time in their household and had formed an impression. I did not make predictions. I did not offer clinical assessments. I stated observations. The letter was a page and a half. I read it 3 times. I signed it, dated it, and handed it to Cora in a sealed envelope with the instruction that if her solicitor wanted to discuss any of it, she could pass along my contact details. It's good, Cora said, after she'd read it. Her eyes were bright. It's really good. It's accurate, I said. That was what I meant for it to be. 3 weeks passed. The custody matter was ongoing, the way these things are. Cora mentioned it occasionally in conversation, and I listened without offering opinion. It wasn't my matter to have opinions on. The letter was written. My involvement was complete. Then came a Tuesday. I was between meetings, phone in hand, when a contact of mine, A man named Philip, who'd known both Cora and I through the mutual friend circle, called me. Philip was a careful, precise man, a property surveyor by trade. He did not make casual calls. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to know I'm only asking because I think you'd want to know." A sentence like that is a very particular kind of announcement. I stepped out of the flow of foot traffic, found a wall to stand against. "Go ahead." Someone in Garrett's corner, his solicitor, or someone from that office, contacted me. They were trying to establish your relationship with Cora. They asked if I knew whether you'd signed anything related to financial support for B. A pause. They also read me a portion of a character reference. They said it was yours, that you described yourself in it as Cora's husband. I said nothing for 3 seconds. Not because I was composing myself, I was perfectly composed, but because I was thinking. "Husband, read me what they said." I said. He did. The language was close to mine in places, lifted from my letter in ways I could recognize, but rewoven. Phrases had been altered. The phrasing around my relationship to Cora had been changed from what I'd actually written. I have spent considerable time in the family home in my capacity as Cora's partner, to something that rendered me a spouse. There was a sentence I had not written about providing regular financial contributions to the household. There was a line I would never have written, as BEA's primary male figure and co-provider. I had not written those words. I had not thought those words. I would not have written them if asked. "Thank you, Philip," I said. "I appreciate you telling me. Is it accurate? Did you write?" "No, I didn't." He let out a slow breath. "I didn't think so. Who has the document?" "It's been filed with the court, as far as I understand. The opposing solicitor has a copy." "Right." I was already thinking through the steps. Clean, sequential, no wasted motion. "I'll handle it." "Are you going to?" "I'll handle it," I said again pleasantly. "Thank you." I ended the call and stood against the wall for another moment. Not from shock. The shock, such as it was, had lasted approximately 2 seconds. What I was doing now was constructing the map. She altered the letter, changed it enough to make claims I never made, filed it with a family court, also told them I was her husband, also implied I'd co-signed some financial document. I ran the implications quietly through my mind. There is a document with my signature on it, or purporting to be my signature, that commits me to financial support for a child who is not mine, in a legal proceeding I agreed to assist with in one specific and limited capacity. My name is now in a court record attached to statements I did not make in a relationship status I do not hold and financial obligations I did not accept. Not anger. There was no anger. Anger is a reaction, and reactions are expensive. What I felt was a kind of clarifying coldness, the same thing I feel when a problem presents itself fully formed and demands a solution. I went back to my meeting. I was present for all of it. I said what needed to be said, contributed where I could, and made a note to myself at the bottom of a page. Original letter. Locate. Wednesday. Action. I keep copies of things. This is not paranoia. It is simply a habit of mind. When a thing matters, you keep a copy. I had printed the letter before giving it to Cora, and the digital file remained on my personal laptop with a timestamp that predated the version she'd filed by more than 2 weeks. That evening I read my original letter again, line by line. Then I sat and wrote out, in plain language, a comparison between what I had written and what, based on Philip's account, had been submitted. I was methodical. I treated it the way I would treat any document that required precision. No editorializing, no emotional charge, no aspersions cast about motive. Just the facts of what each version contained and where they diverged. The next morning, I made a call to a colleague whose professional circle includes a handwriting and document examination specialist. The man's name was Leonard, and he had given evidence in civil proceedings before. I explained what I needed, a comparison between my signed original and whatever document had been filed to establish whether the signature was genuine and whether the document showed signs of having been altered or reconstructed. Leonard said he could turn it around within 5 working days if I sent him what I had. I said that would do fine. I was not rushing. Rushing suggests panic. I had no panic to offer. While I waited for Leonard's report, I drafted my submission to the court. It took me 2 sessions over 2 evenings. I wrote it in the first person, plainly. I identified myself, explained my original involvement, that I had been asked to provide a character reference, had done so voluntarily, and had signed a letter whose full text I was enclosing. I stated clearly that I was not, and had never been, married to the respondent. I stated clearly that I had not entered into any financial support agreement, and that any document purporting to bear my signature in that regard was not something I had signed. I enclosed my original letter, with the file creation timestamp documented. I did not say she had lied. I did not use words like fraud or deception. I used words like discrepancy and inconsistency, and the document as submitted does not reflect the document as written and signed. I let the comparison speak. When Leonard's report arrived, clear, precise, confirming that the filed version showed signs of text having been reconstructed after the page had already been signed, I included it without comment. At the end of the submission, I wrote one sentence that I considered for a long time before leaving in. I make this submission not to influence the outcome of these proceedings or to prejudice any party, but solely to ensure that the record reflects accurate information and that no obligation or representation is attributed to me that I did not in fact make. I read it again. It was true. I meant every word of it. There was no theater in it. I sent it by track post on a Wednesday morning, addressed to the court's family division. I also emailed a copy to the court's administrative address, with a covering note asking for acknowledgement of receipt. I kept a copy of everything. That Wednesday evening, I had dinner with my brother, Tom. Tom is 3 years older than me, and one of those people who could have been unpleasant to be around. He is clever, opinionated, and rarely wrong, but is instead enormously good company because he's also funny and genuinely interested in other people. We try to have dinner once a fortnight. Sometimes it slips to once a month. We went to a small Italian place near where he lives, the kind with paper placemats and a chalkboard menu, and wine by the carafe. We talked about his youngest school situation, about a television series he'd been watching that he wanted to recommend, but couldn't adequately summarize without spoiling. We argued about football in the mild, companionable way we always did, neither of us with strong enough attachment to become genuinely heated. At no point did I mention the court submission, not because I was protecting anything from him or processing anything privately or felt any need to perform normalcy. I simply had nothing to say about it. Yet that wasn't already said. The submission was sent. The process would unfold as it would. There was no drama to narrate, and Tom was not a man who'd have found drama interesting anyway. "You all right?" he asked at one point, pouring the last of the carafe between us. "Fine," I said. "Good, actually." He looked at me for a moment with the particular scrutiny that older brothers possess, then nodded. "Right," he said, and moved on to something else. That was that. Cora called on a Friday. I'd half expected it earlier in the week, but she'd presumably been waiting to see whether something would surface. When it did, I imagined the court's administration had reached out to her solicitor. She called. I saw her name on the screen. I picked up on the second ring. There is nothing to be gained from making a person wait when you intend to answer. "Why did you do this?" Her voice was controlled, but fraying at the edges. A performance of composure rather than composure itself. I recognized the difference. "Do what specifically?" I asked. I was not being obtuse. I want to know which part she was going to offer. "You contacted the court. You undermine my case." After everything, she stopped. "Adjusted." I needed that letter. You had the letter. Another pause. There were a few small changes. Things that needed clarifying. A few small changes. I filed the phrase away. You changed specific language. You represented me as your husband. You implied I'd entered a financial agreement on your behalf. It was for the case. It was to make it stronger. It was to make claims I didn't make, I said. Neutral. No heat. And attach my name to them. You're not going to just throw this. I have a daughter. B is this affects B. I let that land. She was pulling on the one thread she thought might hold. The child. And it was true that there was a child involved, and that the child was not responsible for any of this, and that I had no desire to see a small girl's life made harder. I had addressed that in my submission, in the sentence about not seeking to influence the outcome. What I submitted doesn't harm your case, I said. My original letter still says what it says about your parenting. None of that changed. What I corrected are the things you added, the things that weren't true. You don't understand how courts work. I understand that a document with my signature on it, making commitments I didn't make, is a problem for me, I said, regardless of how courts work. So you just do this without even talking to me. I considered that. She had a point in the sense that I'd not called her first. I'd thought about it briefly and decided against it. If I told her what I was doing before I did it, she would have had the opportunity to take steps I couldn't anticipate. I didn't know what those steps might be, but I didn't need to know. Closing that door was simply the right tactical move. Nothing personal, or rather, nothing beyond the personal. I protected my name, I said. That's what I did. The silence on her end had a texture to it. When she spoke again, the control had slipped further. You were supposed to be on my side. And there it is. The reframing. The suggestion that my failure had been one of loyalty, not hers of honesty. I was on your side, I said. I wrote you an honest letter. What came after that wasn't my doing. I can't believe you'd. She made a sound that in another context might have been the beginning of tears. After everything we've been to each other. After all the time. I felt something then, but it was not guilt. Guilt would require that I had done something I shouldn't have. What I felt was closer to a kind of settled sadness. Not for myself, but for the version of her I'd thought I'd known. I had liked that version. I had thought she was someone of a particular character. I had been building a picture of her, brick by careful brick, over all the months I'd known her, and she had knocked the whole thing over herself. She had just done it somewhat later than most people reveal themselves. The sadness was real. The respect was gone. Take care of yourself, Cora, I said. That's all you're going to say? That's all I have to say. I ended the call, put the phone face down on the desk for a moment, then picked it up again and went on with my evening. She tried twice more in the following days. The first was a text message, long, arriving late at night, formatted in the way that people format messages when they want to give the impression of careful thought, but are actually writing from an emotional height they haven't quite crested. It moved through several registers, wounded, aggrieved, explanatory, finally something close to apologetic, though the apology was of the variety that manages to redirect blame by the end of the sentence. I'm sorry you feel that way. That kind of apology. I read it once. I did not reply. The second was a voicemail, briefer. Her voice was steadier this time. She said she thought we ought to speak like adults, that there were things she wanted to explain, that the situation had been more complicated than I was giving her credit for, that the pressure she'd been under was immense, and that a reasonable person would have done the same. I listened to the voicemail all the way through, which is my habit. I like to know what a person's full position is before I decide how to respond. Then I deleted it, not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish her, but because there was genuinely nothing left in that direction. She had crossed a line so fundamental, not just in what she'd done, but in how she was now describing what she'd done, that the gap between her account of events and reality was no longer something I had any interest in helping her close. When she said the pressure had been immense, possibly true. When she said a reasonable person would have done the same, no. No, they would not have. A reasonable person under pressure might make mistakes, might overreach, might ask for more than they should. A reasonable person does not forge a co-signed financial agreement and alter a sworn character reference and tell a family court that someone is their husband when he is not. These are not things that pressure produces in a person who wasn't already willing to do them. Pressure doesn't manufacture a capability you didn't have. It reveals it. That was what had shifted for me. Not the act itself, bad as it was, but the explanation. She had looked at what she'd done and offered me a story in which it made a kind of sense, in which the extraordinary pressure of the situation justified the extraordinary breach. And she had delivered it with apparent sincerity, which meant one of two things. She believed it, or she believed I could be made to believe it. Either way, we were done. Philip called once more about a week later. He wanted to know, carefully, without prying, whether I was all right. I'm fine, I said. Nothing to recover from. The court thing is handled. The submission is on record. If there are any follow-up questions from the court, I'll answer them. Beyond that, it's their process. And Cora, we've spoken. I left it there. Philip, who was perceptive in his own way, left it there too. Right? He said. Good. Well, let me know if you need anything. I thanked him and meant it. He'd done something that required a degree of courage, calling someone to tell them something uncomfortable at some personal social risk. That was worth acknowledging. My brother called the following Sunday, as he often did. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, his kids, a project he was thinking about taking on, whether the restaurant we'd gone to was worth going back to. We agreed it was. He asked, at some point, whether I was seeing anyone. It was the kind of question he asked periodically, not out of nosiness, but out of what I'd always understood as a kind of brotherly inventory taking. Not at the moment, I said. Right, he said. No follow-up. He knew when to leave a door closed. That too was that. I am a man who believes in precision. Not as a personality trait I've cultivated for effect, but as a practical principle. Imprecision costs you. In how you think, in what you sign, in what you allow to be attached to your name. I had been precise in writing the letter. I had been precise in recognizing the problem. I had been precise in how I addressed it. What I had not been, could not have been, was precise enough to anticipate that the letter would be changed. You can only control what is in your hands. Once you've handed something over, it's in someone else's. That's not naivety. That's the condition of doing anything at all in relation to other people. What you can control is what happens next. I had controlled what happened next. There's a version of this story in which I feel wronged, in which I nurse a grievance, replay conversations, imagine better endings. I have met men who would have done that. Men who would have been furious in ways they could not contain, or defeated in ways that required visible rebuilding, or who would have made the whole thing into a story they told with a particular kind of relish. You won't believe what she did at every opportunity for years. I didn't feel wronged exactly. I felt clarified. Cora had shown me something real about herself. She had done it under pressure, which is when the real thing tends to show. What she'd shown me was that when she was frightened enough and wanted something badly enough, she was capable of compromising someone else's name without apparent hesitation and then framing it afterward as something that a reasonable person would do. That was the information. It was useful information, even if the cost of receiving it was high. I thought about me occasionally, not because I felt responsible for her situation, I didn't, but because she was a small person at the center of something large with very little say in any of it. I hoped the court was paying attention to what was actually in front of them. Two adults who both, presumably, wanted to raise their daughter, one of whom had been willing to forge documents and misrepresent relationships to gain ground. That was relevant information for a family court. My submission had not provided that interpretation. It had simply provided the facts. What the court did with them was the court's business. Cora did not try again after the voicemail. Or perhaps she did, and I simply wasn't available to receive it. I had, quietly and without announcement, made certain practical arrangements. Her number was not blocked. I don't block people on principle because blocking is a statement, and I prefer not to make one. But I had rearranged a few things in my life such that the space she had occupied was simply no longer available in the same way. Not with ceremony. Without ceremony. The dinner table at her kitchen, where we'd eaten the pasta and she'd asked me for the letter, sat in my memory with a peculiar clarity for a while. Not with bitterness. With the clean, factual quality that certain moments acquire when they turn out to be pivots. Looking back, you can see what was turning. At the time, you just see a table, a plate, two people talking. She had been warm. She had been easy to talk to. She had laughed at herself in that disarming way. All of that had been real, presumably. People are not simply their worst moments, even if their worst moments are illuminating. But I had written a careful, honest letter in good faith, and she had taken what she needed from it and changed the rest and filed it with a court and told that court I was her husband. And then, when faced with the consequence of that, she had offered me an explanation in which she was reasonable, and I was the one who had failed to understand. I had understood. That was the thing. I understood it completely. On a Thursday morning, about 2 weeks after I'd sent the submission, I received an acknowledgement from the court's administrative office. Brief, official, confirming receipt of my correspondence and enclosures and noting that it had been passed to the relevant section. No further information. No indication of what, if anything, would follow. I filed the acknowledgement in the same folder as everything else. The original letter, the comparison document, Leonard's report, copies of both envelopes, the acknowledgement. A complete record. I closed the folder. I made coffee. I started my day. One thing I've come to understand, not from this situation in particular, but from enough situations over enough years. The people who alter what you've given them and then call you unreasonable for noticing, they are counting on something. They are counting on the fact that most people, when told they've failed in loyalty, feel a reflexive need to prove they haven't, to demonstrate warmth or flexibility or willingness to see the other point of view, to soften. She had been counting on that. It was not an unfair calculation. It would have worked on many men. Men who loved her, men who wanted to keep the peace, men whose self-concept required them to be seen as generous. There was nothing wrong with any of those men. They just weren't me. I don't require other people's definitions of who I am in order to know who I am. I know what I wrote. I know what I signed. I know what I submitted and why, and in what spirit. I know what happened, in the sequence it happened, without revision. She could not give me a different version of myself. She did not have that capacity. No one does. The letter I wrote was accurate. The letter that was filed was not mine. That is the entire story. Everything else is just the sound of someone realizing that a particular calculation did not work out. The carafe of wine on the table at the Italian restaurant. Tom laughing at something. I'd said something that landed, something about the television series he couldn't summarize. The chalkboard menu slightly crooked on the wall behind him. That is what Wednesday was. That is what Wednesday will remain.
Thanks for listening.